If you're anything like me, you're probably counting down the days until the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC releases, and in which case you're probably looking for some fun ways to replay Elden Ring to get ready for when that DLC drops. Well, today I'm going to help you guys out because we're going to go through 5 more incredibly fun and extremely overpowered weapons that just so happen to be my personal favourites. And as always with these top 5 videos, I'll also be showing you the best builds you can make around these weapons so that you can replicate the same amount of fun for yourselves. So I guess without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. Now we're going to be starting this top 5 video with a weapon that I think is criminally underrated, and of course I am talking about the Dragonscale Blade. The reason why I think this weapon gets overlooked so much is because it's unfortunately a katana, and if you've ever played Elden Ring, you probably know that pretty much every katana in the game is extremely powerful. And unfortunately, due to the fact that bleed is such a crutch mechanic in the game, katanas that don't have a bleed affinity, much like the Dragonscale Blade, tend to get left to the side. But where the Dragonscale Blade lacks that bleed build-up, it certainly makes up for that fact in 2 other buffs, being both frostbite and lightning damage. And let me tell you, with those 2 effects applied to this weapon, you're going to be pretty much doing the same damage as if it did have bleed on it. The other benefit of having these 2 effects instead of bleed is that they can be applied to pretty much every single enemy in the game. So where bleed falls off against certain bosses and enemies in the late game, the Dragonscale Blade will still be doing a catastrophic amount of damage. Throw in the fact that when your enemies do get affected by that frostbite ability, you will not only instantly take away 10% of their health, but you will then continue to do an extra 20% damage with each following strike thereafter. The Dragonscale Blade is something that I've been using more in recent times, and although I myself was one of those people that overlooked this weapon, it has certainly grown on me and is extremely versatile to use, making it really useful throughout the entire game. Now, just to be clear, in order to get this weapon, you do need to defeat the Dragon Skin boss, which is residing in the Lake of Rot, so you do need to complete the majority of Rani's questline, but even in the later New Game Pluses, like the footage you're seeing here from New Game Plus 5, it is still incredibly powerful and is super fun to use, destroying everything that you see on your screen as you cosplay as one of the most powerful samurais to ever exist. And of course, if you want to mimic the damage that you're seeing on screen, here are the stats for the build that I was using. And again, as always with these kinds of videos, it's a level 150 character. So as you can see, we've got 50 vigor, 20 mind, 24 endurance, 25 strength, 60 dexterity, 10 intelligence, 25 faith and 15 arcane. I started as a wretch build, and that's going to be the same for the rest of the weapons that we'll come to obviously later on in the video. So my base stats for everything were 10 across the board. So essentially we do not touch intelligence, we don't put anything into that, and we want to put the majority of our stats into dexterity, as that's going to be the thing that boosts our AR the most. But we also have a little bit into arcane and faith so that we can utilize the draconic spells to give us that sort of like draconic samurai feel. But if you don't want to use any of those incantations, because of course you don't have to, you can take the 5 points out of arcane and put that into either strength or dexterity to boost the AR of the katana even more. But I do still recommend having the 25 faith so that we can run things like Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength to boost our overall damage output and of course our stamina regeneration, especially if you're dual wielding these weapons, so that you can become a spamming god of ice lightning damage. And then of course for the talismans that we're running for this build, I also recommend that you use the Shard of Alexander, because although in the footage I'm mainly using the Ash of War as like a prep before going into battle to obviously infuse the weapons, that Ash of War can still do a lot of damage. So if you want to be more aggressive with it, feel free to do so, and I highly recommend the Shard of Alexander if you do. But either way, I do recommend using the Millicent's Prosthesis, as not only we get a +5 in dexterity, boosting the AR further, but you'll also get a buff in consecutive damage output, which can also be stacked with the Rottened Winged Insignia, before then giving another overall damage output boost with the Ritual Swords Talisman. And then just to give us that last little bit of damage boost with the Wonder Physic, I highly recommend using the Dexterity Knot tier along with the Thorny Crack tier to again boost the based AR with the blade itself, as well as giving us that third boost to successive damage output, and that is how you're going to deal so much damage in quick succession with this weapon. But if you don't want to get up close and personal but still want to do thousands of damage, then this next weapon might be something for you. That is because at the number 4 spot we have got ourselves the Bolt of Gransax. So yes, we're keeping with the sort of draconic lightning theme here, but like I say, instead of getting up close and personal, this weapon will deal thousands and thousands of damage from a ridiculous range. Its unique Ash of War, the Ancient Lightning Spear, turns a weapon into a ancient lightning spear, which you can then hurl at your enemies, doing that immense amounts of damage. And the best thing about this Ash of War is, of course, you can target specific areas on certain enemies, and this can be extremely fun, or at least extremely satisfying for people like myself, when you use that attack to hit enemies in the head. Because for me, especially in Elden Ring, there's nothing more satisfying than defeating a large dragon or just a larger boss by slamming a bolt of lightning between their eyeballs. This weapon is also relatively easy to get because all you need to do is go to Lionel and jump off of this particular ledge to walk up a much larger version of the Bolt of Gransax to pick up the miniature version that you can use yourself. But this weapon is missable. If you go too far into the game and defeat Malekith, you will then turn the capital into the capital of Ash, which will make this weapon unobtainable. So if you've done that already in your game and you wanted to get your hands on this weapon, the only way that you're now going to be able to get it is to go into New Game Plus and grab it before you defeat Malekith. Much like how the Dragonscale Blade was still very useful in the later New Game Pluses, this is still extremely powerful no matter what New Game Plus that you're in. So even if you do have to progress into a next New Game Plus to get the weapon, you won't be missing out, as it will still be incredibly powerful and extremely fun to use. And of course, the stats that I recommend that you use with this weapon are the following. So we've got 50 points in Vigor, 25 Mind, 24 Endurance, 30 Strength, 60 Dexterity, 10 Intelligence, 25 Faith, and 10 Arcane. And again, the reason why we've got a 30-60 split in Strength and Dexterity is because that gave the best AR with the stats that we have available. And again, the reason why we've gone into 25 points into Faith is so that we can use things like Golden Vow along with other lightning incantations. Just to be abundantly clear, although the Ash of War turns the weapon into a bolt of lightning, it does not get affected by the Faith stat. It purely scales off of Strength and Dexterity, but that's not too much of an issue because the weapon gets boosted more than enough with these particular talismans. So of course, where we're focusing on the Ash of War, we need the Shard of Alexander to do that. And the beautiful thing about the Ash of War is it's chargeable, so we can also use the Godfrey's icon before then finishing off with the Lightning Scorpion charm and the Ritual Swords talisman. And again, whereas lightning damage, with the Wonder Physic, we can use the Lightning Shroud Crack tier as well as the Dexterity Knot tier to boost our base AR and our lightning damage by 20%. Of course, those lightning damage buffs will also affect any incantations that you use that are also lightning based. So if you did want to say mess around with the Faith and include a lot of ancient dragon talismans, you can do so, as this will also boost those damage outputs as well. But if you're just purely worrying about the weapon itself, then these are the best things to run with it. And again, we're going to be switching things up for our third weapon that we're going to talk about, and that's because at the number 3 spot we have got ourselves the Magma Blades. Out of all of the curve swords that are available in the game, the Magma Blades are by far my favourite, because not only do you have access to a unique version of the spinning slash Ash of War that does a bunch of damage as well as poise damage whilst leaving a pool of lava on the floor dealing damage over time. I know, that's a lot of damage, but it also looks incredibly cool and is extremely rare. This weapon is only dropped by 2 enemies in the entire game, which are the 2 man serpents located just above the Temple of Eagle in the Volcano Manor, so it also gets bonus points for being a flex on your enemies as well as your friends, because unless they've gone out and purposely farmed for this weapon, there's a very high chance that they don't actually have it. Throw in the fact that this weapon scales best with Strength and Faith, you can make an extremely versatile build with all sorts of different different incantations whilst having one of the most lethal weapon types in the entire game. That's because if you dual wield these things where they're a curved sword, you have the unique jumping and running light attacks which do a flurry of 4 or 5 attacks in very quick succession. So if you pair it with the right talismans, which we'll come to in a moment, and the right buffs, you can deal catastrophic damage, again against pretty much any enemy in the game. But even against enemies that are resistant to fire, like the magma worms or the fire giant, where you're using 2 curved swords, like I say, you can deal thousands of damage in very quick succession just with the base AR alone. And of course, to mimic that kind of damage, here are the stats in order to do so. So again, as normal, we've got 50 vigor, 20 mind, 24 endurance, but then we've got 55 strength, 15 dexterity, as that's the minimum required to actually wield the weapon, before then finishing off with 10 intelligence, 45 faith, and 10 arcane. But the real devastating thing with these weapons is the DPS, and these talismans will boost that even further. So of course we've got Millicent's prosthesis, which will again give us a +5 dexterity, giving extra base AR, as well as that first boost to successive damage, which again can be stacked with the Rotted Winged Insignia, and where we're also going to be making use of the unique Ash of War. The Shard of Alexander will boost our damage output with that particular move as well, before then finishing it off with the Ritual Swords talisman. And then for the Wonder Physic, I suggest putting a third boost to successive damage with the Thorny Crack Tier, as well as having the Flame Shrouding Crack Tier in there as well to boost your overall damage output by 20%. And then again, with the Faith that's available in this particular build, we can run Flame Grant Me Strength along with Golden Vow, as well as a bunch of incantations, whether that be fire incantations, frenzied flame incantations, lightning incantations, essentially whichever ones you want to use, you can use it in this particular build. So it's extremely versatile, extremely overpowered, and guess what? Extremely fun to use. It's essentially a bit of an upgrade on the Dragonscale Blades, as you'll have a much quicker, free-flowing moveset with an Ash of War that's also devastating, and of course can deal damage over time by leaving that lava on the floor. So I know it can be a bit of a chore to get this weapon, but I highly suggest that you do, because if you don't have the Magma Blades, you're definitely missing out. But if the graft of getting the Magma Blades is putting you off a little bit, then don't worry, because the weapon that we've got in the number 2 spot is a whole lot easier to obtain. That is because at number 2 we have got ourselves the Darkmoon Greatsword. I mean, I probably don't really have to introduce this weapon to most of you, but for those of you that don't know, there is a very valid argument that the Darkmoon Greatsword is the best weapon in the entire game. That is because when you use its Ash of War, it infuses the Darkmoon Greatsword with that Darkmoon energy, transforming your charged heavy into a projectile of ice cold magic. But the caveat with this particular weapon is it keeps its stance damage as if you were doing a normal heavy attack, making it possible to break the poise of some of the highest defense enemies in the game with just 2 or 3 hits of this projectile. But that's not the only good thing, because again, pretty much with every projectile that you use, you'll be doing anywhere between 2,500 to 3,500 damage, if not more, in your earlier playthroughs, whilst doing a large amount of frost build-up, essentially breaking your enemies' poises, potentially afflicting that frostbite on your enemies when you go to critical hit them, so they'll be taking an extra 20% damage when you do that critical attack. So realistically, this weapon is just damn right devastating. And the way that you get your hands on this incredible weapon is by completing Rani's questline and meeting her in the Moonlight Altar, and after speaking to her there, she will drop the Darkmoon Greatsword, which you can of course pick up for yourself. And again, where it's got that frost ability tied to it, it is versatile against every single enemy in the game, and of course is extremely fun to bring even the largest of enemies down with that wave of ice cold magic. And of course, if you want to mimic the damage that you're seeing on screen, here are the stats for this particular build. So again, we've got 50 vigor, 20 mind, 24 endurance, before then having 21 strength, 15 dexterity, 79 intelligence, and then 10 faith and arcane. And the reason why there's that kind of split between the strength, dexterity, and intelligence is, once again, that's going to be the best way to get the best AR out of the weapon with the stats available for a level 150 character. And where this build only has 10 faith, if you did want to use Golden Vow, you can simply use a dagger with the Golden Vow Ash of War tied to it, but I'm just going to tell you now, it's not necessary. But if you wanted that sort of like extra, I think it's 10% damage that you get with that, feel free. But realistically, like I say, it's not necessary because these talismans will boost the damage output more than enough. Of course, again, where we're using that Ash of War, the Shard of Alexander is going to be our good friend with this one. And again, where this is going to be a charged move that we're using with the Ash of War, we can make use of Godfrey's Icon before then buffing the damage even more with the Magic Scorpion Charm and the Ritual Swords Talisman. And then just to boost the damage even more with the Wonder Physic, we can also put the Magic Shrouding Cracked here in there. And although I praise the poise breaking of this weapon a lot, I also put the Stone Barb Cracked here in here, because when you go into the later New Game Pluses, it might take a little bit longer to break enemies' poises, so if you still want to break them in 2 or 3 hits, then the Stone Barb Cracked here is going to be incredibly useful for that. But if you feel like you can get away without using it, then feel free to use something like the Intelligence Knot tier to boost the damage output of the weapon even more. And one thing that I haven't mentioned yet is of course the usefulness of other spells in this build, because where we've got so much intelligence, we essentially have the full catalogue of every single spell that exists in the game at our disposal. So things like the Great Blade Phalanxes and Loretta's Longbow will just add to the versatility of this, again all just dealing a load of damage at the same time. And if you really felt like you need a little bit extra boost in damage output, then of course you can use Terra Magica as well, as that will again boost the damage output of the weapon and any spells that you decide to use. So yeah, it should be really easy to see why a lot of people love this weapon, myself included, and why a lot of people consider this to be the best weapon in the entire game. But there is one weapon that I enjoy using just a little bit more and I think is just as good as the Darkmoon Greatsword. And that weapon of course is none other than Eleonora's Poleblade. And I know for many of you, you've probably seen the video that we made around this weapon a couple of weeks ago, so I won't delve too much into it, but for those of you that haven't, Eleonora's Poleblade is just phenomenal. It's a weapon that you can pick up extremely early, especially if you complete Yura's questline, because if you do so, you can essentially get this weapon as soon as you access Altus Plateau, and once you obtain it, it's definitely a weapon that you're not going to want to put down. It has an incredibly unique moveset, both with its heavy attacks and also its Ash of War, the Bloodblade Dance, where you essentially twirl yourself around doing a catastrophic amount of blood flame damage, of course proccing bleed super easily, whilst also doing a bunch of fire damage at the same time. The unique thing about this weapon is where bleed weapons would typically fall off at the end of the game, as most enemies like Radagon, the Elden Beast, and the majority of dragons are resistant to bleed and slash damage, Eleonora's Poleblade still holds strong due to its insane DPS and the fact that it's got that fire damage as well. Just like how the Darkmoon Greatsword also broke enemies' poises really well, Eleonora's Poleblade is also really good at breaking enemies' poises, especially if you make full use of the Ash of War. You will break your enemies' poises in just 2 or 3 uses of it. So even in a worst case scenario where you're coming up against an enemy that is extremely resistant to fire and you're solely just relying on the base AR, you are still going to do a lot of damage just where you're hitting your enemies so many times in quick succession, as well as breaking their poise, allowing for a load of critical attacks. So as I say, even in a worst case scenario, you're still going to come up trumps and deal thousands and thousands of damage. And again, in order to do those thousands and thousands of damage, here are the stats for this particular build. So we've got 50 Vigor, 20 Mind, 24 Endurance, 12 Strength, as that's the minimum requirement for this particular weapon, before then pumping 39 points into Dexterity, 10 Intelligence, 25 Faith, and then 49 Arcane. So yeah, Dexterity and Arcane are going to be the best scaling stats for this particular weapon. And again, we've got 25 points in Faith to utilise Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. And then for the talismans, again, where we're using the Ash of War quite a bit, Shard of Alexander is going to be our friend with that. And then like I say, with the amount of DPS that we're doing, we can very easily proc our successive attacks. So we're going to get extreme use out of things like Millicent's prosthesis, which again can be stacked with Rotten's winged insignia. And then where this is a bleed weapon, it's extremely useful to use the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, as that will give us a 20% boost to our damage output whenever the bleed proc occurs. But again, if you do come up against enemies that are resistant to bleed, you can swap this out for something else of your choosing, whether that be a Dragonscale Greatsword for extra protection, or even the Fire Scorpion Charm for extra damage with the fire side of the Blood Flame abilities. But either way, with the Wonder Physic, I highly recommend running the Thorny Crack tier again to give us that third use of successive damage output, along with the Stone Barb Crack tier, because again, much like with the Darkmoon Greatsword, when you're going into your later new game pluses, that will help out with breaking your enemies' poises as they get that buff in poise and just normal defense. But in your earlier playthroughs, if you just want to delve into straight damage output, you can also use things like the Dexterity Knot tier or even the Flame Shrouding Crack tier. But either way, I can guarantee that you will have an immense amount of fun with this weapon, especially again if you're a fan of samurai builds and just looking immensely cool as you destroy your enemy's health bars. And there you have it. Those are 5 more extremely powerful and extremely fun weapons to use in Elden Ring, and they are in fact the 5 weapons that I enjoy using the most. Of course, I just wanted to make this video to share those particular builds with you guys because I know they're extremely powerful, and I know some of you are still looking for new ways to play Elden Ring whilst we wait for the DLC to drop later on this year. But also feel free to use the comment section to get your builds down below and share them with others, whether that be your favorite weapons to use or just something ridiculously overpowered that you want to share with the rest of us. But either way, I hope you have enjoyed this video, and if you have done, if you don't mind me asking, to please leave a like rating down below. It's the best and easiest way to let me know that you've enjoyed this video and you want to see more overpowered builds like this. And of course, if you're new around here, feel free to hit that subscribe button. We're constantly going through all sorts of different weapons and builds that are extremely fun and overpowered to use in Elden Ring, so if you want to stay up to date with the latest videos around all of that, then of course make sure you hit that subscribe button. And just lastly, I wanted to say thank you again for all of your support on the channel recently. We've literally just gone past 17,000 subscribers as I'm doing this voiceover, so we're almost at 20,000, and that's crazy to think and crazy to say. So honestly, just thank you all so much for the incredible support that you've shown on this channel. And before I waffle on too much, I'm gonna leave things there, guys. So thank you again so much for watching this video. Have fun with these weapons and let me know how you get on. But I guess for now, I will catch you in the next video of whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.